and I'm going to invite Professor Keith Brown to speak to us now. So again, Keith, if you just introduce yourself, say a little bit about what you do, and then we'll hand over to you. So welcome, Keith.
So, hello everybody. My name is Professor Keith Brown. I was the National Director of the National Centre for Post-Qualifying Social Work. I spend most of my life working with government departments, writing guidance on safeguarding adults, older people, mental health, these sorts of arenas. I currently work at the Ministry of Department of Health and Social Care, the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office. I chair the NHS England Safeguarding Adults National Network, responding to the Secretary of State, and I also lead the national research into financial fraud and scams. So that's my background. I don't class myself as a Christian leader. I'm a leader who happens to be a Christian, and I'm going to share with you some of my reflections on these arenas. So, Ministry to Seniors, I wanted to talk a little bit about pastoring and supporting. Roger mentioned this earlier, and just to remind us all that churches are families from the youngest to the oldest, and that we are all interconnected. So this brief presentation is not really just for seniors, it's for everybody. You might become a carer today. You might get a phone call to say that your loved one is in hospital and you need to find residential care or domiciliary care for them. And it's that reminder that we're interconnected, and it's not just a specific ministry just for older people or for seniors. We are one family from the youngest to the oldest. And I'd like to really, first of all, say churches provide fantastic support at the end of life via funerals and bereavement support. It's one of the things that I think the church provides to society that society just takes for granted. And yet it really is very, very powerful. Every time you as a church leader, a minister, a pastor, a volunteer, every time that you're with a family, with a loved one that's lost a partner, a relative, a friend, every time you're there in that moment of need, the families will never forget that time. They're painful, they're difficult, but the fact that you were there will always be remembered. But I'd like to ask, is our pastoral support always as good in terms of things like advanced care planning for all? And the work I'm going to be presenting and talking about, and the national guidance I'm going to be showing in a minute, is based on the work I've produced for the NHS and the social care sector in general. In other words, this is the guidance that health professionals and social care professionals use, and I've turned it around into a Christian manual so that you can work with the most impactful and the most valuable and the best guidance possible. So some questions I'd like to ask you all is your pastoring and support, do you know about these areas? Do you understand what is a lasting power of attorney, an LPA property and affairs and or health and welfare? Do you understand the significance of them? Do you understand what a court-appointed deputy is? Would you know how to identify if somebody was a victim of a scam or a fraud? Do you know what the new domestic abuse bill will cover and what's involved in it? Would you know how to find good quality residential or domiciliary care for a loved one, a relative, a friend, a member of your congregation? Do you know what the Mental Capacity Act is and its significance for helping people with dementia and or brain injury? Do you have any understanding of what the impact of loneliness and isolation is on people's well-being? And finally, don't panic about this, but do consider safeguarding adults issues. In other words, hopefully read some of our guidance. So these are 3 bits of guidance that I've produced recently with Faith in Later Life. The first one on the left is the Safeguarding Adults Guidance for Christian Faith Organisations. A number of years ago, I wrote the National Safeguarding Adults Framework for the country that's used throughout everywhere in England and Wales. This Christian version of it basically takes out the National Safeguarding Guidance and puts it into a Christian faith-based context for you in churches to understand what are the safeguarding issues that you need to consider and think about. In the middle is the guidance for Christian faith organisations in the support and value of older people. And that guidance will answer and give you key indicators to all those questions that I've just raised in the previous 2 or 3 slides. It will go through lasting powers of attorney. It will go through advanced care planning. It will go through issues around fraud and scams. It will give you good, clear advice and signpost you to other national documents that are worthwhile considering so that you can ensure that your pastoral care and your pastoral support is of the best quality it could possibly be. And I finally stuck on the end here some other guidance I've recently produced called Guidance on Preventing Stress and Burnout in Churches for Christian Faith-Based Organisations. COVID has been a tough time. And it's my observation that many of the Christian workers that I'm speaking to at the moment, many of the church leaders are tired. It's been a tough time running churches online. It's been a tough time with us not being able to meet together. And so I produced this guidance really to give us important advice and guidance on preventing stress and burnout. Because working in the field of supporting older people, working in the field of advanced care planning, working in the areas of death and bereavement and support is difficult sometimes, and it does have an emotional cost. So have a look at all of these. They're all available on the Faith in Later Life website. So my final thoughts and reflections before we go to some questions. I'd like to suggest that working with seniors, with older people, is a major, if not the biggest major mission opportunity for the church in our land. Our society, government, does not know how to fund care for a demographically aging society. Society doesn't know how to manage or cope or deal with the growing numbers of older people in our society. Loneliness is endemic. Lonely people cry out for somebody to visit them and to share their lives with. Recently, a lady in Southampton who is a florist approached me because I chair something called Love Southampton. Love Southampton is a body that represents all the churches in the city to the council and to the health organisations. We represent 3 food banks, 4 debt agencies, and a number of befriending agencies. This young lady is a florist, said to me she didn't know how she could best serve the Lord as a florist, but what she was able to do was to go to the wholesale florist at the end of the week and to collect old flowers that were not past their best but were going to be thrown away and therefore of little value. And she offered to make 20 bouquets of flowers per week to give out to churches if they'd find them of value. 4 churches signed up to receiving the flowers, so it's a different church every week. And volunteers went out through the city to visit sheltered accommodation. Sheltered accommodation with older people in them that were locked in this accommodation, not able to get out because of COVID. And they simply offered the flowers. Many of these people were in tears. People saying they'd not received a gift from anybody for years, including Christmas. Many of them are desperate, looking forward to next week because when Monday comes along, they can invite the visitor in to the communal areas in the sheltered accommodation units. And they want to hear about church. They want to hear about faith. They are desperately lonely. And this, to me, is becoming one of the major mission opportunities for the church in the 21st century. And finally, I'd like to remind us that seniors, older people, are also part of our own families. And in my experience, often, we as Christians find it far easier to share our faith with anybody else but our own family. And we often find it really quite hard to share intimate situations, intimate details, complex situations, and our faith with our own families. Do consider using some of these guidelines that I've produced as a way to bridge into having difficult conversations with your own families about what their wishes would be as they approach maybe the end of their lives. What would be their advanced care planning decisions? Do use some of the materials to think through how you might protect your own loved ones from fraud and scams, which are just becoming endemic in our society. And also, do use this information to consider for yourselves, not maybe as older people, as seniors, as anybody over the age of 18. What would you want to have happen to you if a tragic event happened to you? I hope that's interesting and of help, and I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can deal with some questions.